Welcome to the Put On Waivers Media Group, home of the Put On Raiders podcast and the Student Body Right podcast. This is your place for the best breakdowns and the best insight for those who fight on and bleed silver and black. Now, here are your hosts, Dwayne Douglas and Ryan Holmes.
And welcome, everybody, to another glorious episode of the Put On Raiders podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Douglas, along with Ryan Holmes, and we are podcasting off the beautiful shores of the Pacific Ocean. Beautiful day out here in Southern California. This is wrapping up now. This month of July is started, and now next thing you know, it'll be August, and the next thing you know, we'll be going football full bore all the way to March. RTPW Podcast is my Twitter handle, and RHOLM22 is Ryan's. Please subscribe, dislike, 5-star, comment, leave a comment, leave some questions for us as well too. On Instagram, Put On Waivers _podcast and at Put On Raiders podcast as well. A lot to talk about today. We have our list, our position list of our favorite players who played in our lifetime. So when I give you my number one tight end, I don't want to hear Todd Christensen. I mean, he was great, but I know more as a broadcaster than I do as a player. Like I didn't, he had the curls popping. I was jealous of that hair that Christensen had, stuff like that. So definitely stay tuned for that stuff. And then we also have some around the NFL stuff with Jimmy G, in segment 2, Jimmy G and all that stuff like that. Baker going to the Panthers, all that stuff like that. And nothing with Watson yet, which is surprising. But the Raiders do have a new president. And it seems like, everybody likes the new president. And I think that's probably what happens the first day, obviously. But she seems like she is 100% about Vegas, right? I mean, she really kind of embodies what Vegas is, the gaming experience, all the connections she has. Sandra Douglas Morgan is the new president of the Raiders, and hopefully a president that's going to be there for a long time.
Yeah, she's a native born and raised in Las Vegas. I just did some background work on her today. I think the biggest thing that stands out is she understands the business footprint of Las Vegas and the state of Nevada, which the Raiders need to tap into, keep the revenue streams coming, sponsorships, those kind of things. So she seems like the perfect person to have on the business side. She was the vice chair of the Las Vegas Hosts Committee for the Super Bowl. She's been on the Nevada Gaming Board as an executive director and chairman. She has a law degree. She's been a lawyer for 20 years. Uh-huh. She went to University of Nevada, Reno. She got her law degree from UNLV. She's a board member at Caesars Entertainment and Allegiant Travel. And the one interesting thing I did notice, she's married to a former NFL player as well.
Yeah.
Don Morgan, who played with the Vikings and the Cardinals. So she's tapped into everything business in Vegas. She's tapped into the strip, the casinos, the gaming board. It's going to be interesting to see as these gambling companies start infiltrating into the NFL, how quickly and how much money is really coming from that side, because we could see the salary cap skyrocket if gambling money takes off.
I love the question during the press conference was, when are we going to be able to have kiosks, gaming kiosks in the building in Allegiant? So I can imagine, the lines for the bathrooms were long. I can imagine the lines of putting bets in the Allegiant Stadium. I think
probably do it from your mobile phone.
Yeah, if I do it from your mobile phone. I think that they have that in English Premier Soccer, where you can place bets inside the stadium and stuff like that. But yeah, seems like a home run. They've had a little influx there. The women who, it's hard to call her I would say token, or just say like a trophy piece kind of president, like some of the people who have allegations towards the Raiders called her, when she has this kind of background. Like she is somebody who was deserving of this opportunity. So it's hard to kind of say that part of it. And she didn't shy away from the questions about, the Raiders, the stuff that was going on with the Raiders. She kind of embraced that, which was like, for me, that was kind of smart by her, just go ahead and just talk about it immediately.
Yeah, to me, it just speaks to the Raiders' history of inclusion, being at the forefront of some of these movements. And clearly, she's qualified for the position. And Mark Davis hired who he thought was the best person, regardless of color, regardless of race, regardless of male or female. And she's really impressive when you look at her resume on paper. And now we'll see what she does and how she takes over the organization. She's going to have some stuff to fight here early on with some of the allegations of workplace environment that are floating around the Raiders. She's got some stuff to clean up, but I think she can handle it.
Yeah, right after the press conference, somebody texted me from one of my buddies because I was a poli sci minor, and he says to me, "Can she run for office?" And I'm like, "Leave my president alone. Don't be trying to put her in the real politics. Like, get out of there with that. We don't need to do all that."
Her degree is in political science from
I know. That's what I'm thinking. Man, she's very impressive. No question about it. Let's see here. So let's start with the O-line first. The O-line first is our favorite offensive lineman in our lifetime as Raider fans. So if you don't see Art Shell, if you don't see Gene Upshaw, if you don't see some of the greats, it's okay.
Jim Otto,
00 there. So which I'm surprised nobody's rocked 00 since then. So you can go ahead with your fifth favorite Raider offensive lineman.
Yeah, I think the offensive line one's going to be fun because there's so many to choose from 5 positions across the line. I hope our lists vary a little bit. My fifth one is Barry Sims, who played 9 years with the Raiders. He was an undrafted free agent. The Raiders signed this guy at NFL Europe. He was playing for the Scottish Claymores. And in 1999, and 5 weeks into his rookie season, the starter goes down and he's on the road. They start him on the road at Buffalo against Bruce Smith. The Raiders win the game 20-14, and the rest is history. He's the starting left tackle for 7 years before moving inside. Was the left tackle on the teams in Gruden's early run in the late 90s into the early 2000s, so they went to the Super Bowl. So, I just loved watching him play. He was an undrafted free agent and made a hell of a career for himself. Came over from NFL Europe. So I'm going to go Barry Sims, number 5.
The one thing that is funny though, was it Jason Taylor, the defensive end from the Dolphins? It's funny because he was the only guy who really gave Barry Sims, when he was playing tackle, a really hard time. I remember those games vividly, and I'm like, I was like, because I never basically over offensive line, you don't really, when you don't hear their names, that's probably the best. That was a good thing. So I remember playing the Dolphins, and he gave up a couple of sacks and he gave some pressures to Jason Taylor, and that's when I was just like, Jason Taylor must be really freaking good, because Barry Sims was not a bad player. He was a really, really good offensive lineman. My number 5 is big old Mo Collins. I love Mo Collins. Just the guy in guard position, just like moving the pile. He didn't have a long career in the National Football League, but just a really powerful, powerful guy, get that run game going for the Raiders here. And that's my number 5. Number 4, your offensive line number 4.
Yeah, I went Donald Penn, number 4. It was a short stay with the Raiders, 5 years, but 2-time Pro Bowler, anchored the left side of that line when they had the original car insurance offensive line. Just true Raider by nature. He loved playing for the Raiders, and then to cap it off, scored 2 touchdowns. So when you get to see the left tackle score 2 touchdowns, that's great. But just love what Donald Penn brought to the team late in his career, and had a nice 4-year run with the Raiders prior to getting injured.
So just for people who know, we don't know what our lists are before we do the show. My number 4 is also Donald Penn, but I mean, obviously he and Khalif Barnes were great at catching touchdown passes, right? You remember some of those days too, and I know people remember the one sack that he let go. But to me, put the ball in the belly of the court or the running back, and you win that game. And Carr plays the playoffs, and we see what we see. I mean, maybe the Raiders battle the Patriots for the AFC Championship game in 2016. But he was fun to watch, and he was. Your heart as a fan is always gonna go towards a guy who embraces the silver and black, and he definitely embraced the silver and black. Donald Penn, he loved playing for the Raiders. Number 3.
Yeah, number 3 is another fairly recent Raider. I went Rodney Hudson, center, 3-time Pro Bowler with the Raiders, played 6 years with them, was the anchor of the offensive line, came over from the Chiefs and immediately, helped that offensive line come together and play well for Derek Carr early in his career. And, I just loved watching Rodney Hudson. It kind of fell off there at the end as far as run blocking. But was always a stout pass blocker and rarely gave up pressures.
My favorite memory of Rodney Hudson and that offensive line, original car insurance, was when they had They were beating up on the Broncos, and they're running it down their throat. Carr throws an interception. He audibles out of the play, throws an interception. We think it's an interception, but when they come back from commercial, the cornerback dropped it, and they showed the offensive line just yelling at Derek, like, dude, what are you doing? We're running. Let us keep running the football. Like, you could tell the conversation. You knew what the conversation was. That I remember that him and Clutchy Osimile were going at it too. Just like say, hey, let's just keep running the football. They can't stop us. So I remember that. But yeah, my number 3 was Don Mosbar. He's the first Raider offensive lineman that I remember people talking about all the time when I started reading about sports and started really getting into football. Football was basically, oddly enough, football was the last sport I got into. I got into the baseball because I played for a long time, and basketball with the Lakers. But I got the Raiders were kind of that team that I kind of got into last, but they ended up being my favorite team now. But yeah, Don Mosbar was the first offensive lineman that I really kind of caught my eye. I remember just the people who were like, whether it was, whatever shows, they didn't have the Good Morning Football back then. Back then, they just had the only shows they had were like the shows before the game, the pregame shows. And I remember people talking about Don Mosbar a lot, about the 4 o'clock game. I used to live on the East Coast, so I did love Don Mosbar. Your number 2?
Number 2, I went Lincoln Kennedy. 3-time Pro Bowler, loved Lincoln Kennedy with the Raiders, 8 years with the Raiders. Surprisingly, he was a first-round pick by Atlanta. In 2 of his first 3 years, he was hurt. He played like 2 games and 4 games. Al Davis comes in, grabs him for a draft, I think a second rounder. And the next thing you know, he's a stalwart on the Raiders line. He played 15 games in 7 of those 8 years. So after battling injuries early, was a rock on that Raiders offensive line on the right side. Again, and that late 90s, early 2000s team, he was on that team with Barry Sims. And I just loved watching Lincoln Kennedy.
So my number 2 is a guy who, when they coined the phrase "play to the echo of the whistle," Steve Wisniewski played to the echo of the whistle. Like he was a great offensive lineman for the Raiders for years, and he was a guy who just protected the quarterback, helped them run the football, and was able to just kind of set the. He played with the edge. Like, if you want an offensive line who played with an edge, I mean, Steve Wisniewski was able to do that for years for the Raiders.
Yeah, my number 1 is Steve Wisniewski. I was surprised that he wasn't a Hall of Famer. It didn't occur to me. I just assumed that he was, but he's not. I think he should be. 8-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, all 90s offensive line member, like 13 years. And again, like you said, just nasty. Play to the whistle. He was the kind of guy. His own team loved him. The opponents hated him. But he was a great Raider, and I believe that someday he will be able to get that gold jacket and be in the Hall of Fame.
I remember somebody saying, I forgot who it was, one of the premier defensive linemen of that era. He's getting interviewed by NFL Films or whatever, Steve Sable and them guys, and he said that you remember the games after you played Steve Wisniewski, because your body just felt different. And I think that's probably one of the biggest compliments you could give an offensive lineman. Let's see here. Well, Lincoln Kennedy was my number 1. I just love Link. I love Link. I love his post football career. We actually don't even know who's going to be the play-by-play or the color commentary for the Raiders this year, right? We don't even know that because I forgot his name now. Musburger is not going to be there, and we don't know if Lincoln Kennedy's coming back either. So we have to see what happens there as far as that goes. But he's my favorite guy, and obviously he talks about the stories of him going to Denver, the Raiders winning in Denver, and the snowballs and everybody throwing snowballs at him. He's just going into the stands trying to go after the guys who were throwing snowballs. He didn't really care, so he's something else. So that's our top 5 offensive linemen in our lifetime. So let's go to defensive tackles. And sorry, number 5 for me, real quick. So I think he moved around a little bit. So I'm gonna on my number 5, I have Richard Seymour and Nolan Harrison. Nolan Harrison, I think, moved around a little bit, but I know for Richard Seymour, I give him the professionalism award, because I know when he got traded here, he didn't want to get traded to the Raiders. Like, he did not want to play for the Raiders. He did not want to play for the Raiders. But I feel like once he got acclimated, once he got going, he really was a force for the Raiders and played really well on that defensive line for the Raiders.
Yeah, I got 2 honorable mentions. First, Bob Golick, just from Saved
Mhm.
by the Bell college years. Surprisingly, it was only 1 year long, 8 episodes, but Saved by the Bell way in. And Nolan Harrison was my other one. Just the story of him ripping that ATM machine in college out of the wall because it stole its debit card. If you've never heard that story, Google it. But the man ripped a ATM machine out of the wall at a bank. So he had some issues in college. I think there was a DUI as well, but he was an honorable mention. Loved watching him play. My number 5 is an undrafted free agent, Tommy Kelly. Played
Yes.
9 years with the Raiders, 34 and a half sacks, 10 forced fumbles. He was on some really bad teams, but you always knew that Tommy Kelly was going to show up, and he gave the defense everything he could. He didn't have a lot of help around him for a long time, but he, again, embraced the silver and black and the Raider image, and he's going to go down as a great Raider.
My number 4, the guy who, and if we did a top 5 best last names for Raider players, is Chester McLaughlin. I mean, that last name is huge. I mean, he was a big man, just changed the game when in the middle. You had to account for him on every single play. One of my favorite Raiders, Chester McLaughlin, comes in at number 4 on Dwayne's list.
As we go through these defensive tackles, they're all big, massive guys that can move.
Yes.
So, these are a lot of Al Davis picks, but my number 4 is Grady Jackson. Spent 5 years with the Raiders, 19 sacks, four forced fumbles, but big, kind of in that Jerry Ball, just big, short to the ground, hard to move, could move around, could get in the backfield, could get after the quarterback. But loved watching Grady Jackson play. I was sad when he left. I want to say Atlanta signed him, but good 5-year career for the Raiders there. He was a late pick, I think 5th or 6th round, later round draft pick, but a lot of production from Grady Jackson.
Yeah, Grady Jackson. So I forgot about Grady Jackson. I do remember that game against the was it the Jaguars where Jerry Ball got an interception and ran it back for a touchdown? You remember that?
He was gassed. Yeah.
Dude, I'll never forget that.
He needed the oxygen.
I remember that. Dude, I can't remember where my keys are, but I can remember shit like that. It's amazing. Tommy Kelly was my number 3. Love Tommy Kelly. I just, the beard and everything like that. I love Tommy Kelly. Just like, just a guy who can get to the quarterback, do a lot of different things on the defensive line. So Tommy Kelly is my number 3. Who's yours?
I went Chester McLaughlin 3. Again, you kind of touched on it, but 4 Pro Bowls as a Raider, 39 and a half sacks, 10 forced fumbles in 6 years. So very productive from the interior of the offensive line. Unfortunately, he went and played for the Chiefs and the Broncos after playing with the Raiders. But and again, a first-round pick, big, 340 pounds, could run, could get after the quarterback. Al Davis was pretty good at picking defensive tackles.
It seemed like he was still cooking at this time. Al Davis, he was cooking. He had some play. He had some guys. Because you mentioned it in our you texted me before, and there's like a lot of Pro Bowls. And so with some of these players that the Raiders have in these spots here, as we continue our roll through our favorite defensive linemen, defensive tackles of our time. So we did 3. Number 2, Daryl Russell. Daryl Russell was a fight on, right, and then also went to the Raiders. So he was one of my favorite players with the Raiders. Just can get pressure up the middle. I think that's when you see my number 1, you'll see that I think it's impressive when you can get pressure up the middle and get to the quarterback. That's why what Aaron Donald does is just amazing. When you can get pressure up the middle and because like those guys, you're dealing with a guard, you're dealing with the center a lot of the time, you're getting double teams. You're going to lose the battle a lot, but to continue that push and continue to hustle to get to the quarterback, I think is always something that's special.
Yeah, my number 2 is Richard Seymour. You've already touched on it. Again, 2 Pro Bowls. And when I told you 12 of the 15 guys on my list that I made Pro Bowls, they made Pro Bowls as Raiders. This isn't Pro Bowls as other teams that came over at the end of their career. So these guys were all productive during their time. Again, Seymour, 2-time Pro Bowler in 4 years. Sack production wasn't quite what it was in New England. He had 18 and a half sacks in 4 years. But I'll never forget when they were walking down the field and he turned around and he punched Ben Roethlisberger. Got kicked out of the game. But I'd love to know what Roethlisberger said to him to cause Richard Seymour to turn around and punch him in the middle of the game.
I still want to know what Mason Rudolph said that time. Didn't something
to Garrett? Yeah.
To Garrett, because Garrett is not a guy who would even do something. It's neither was Seymour. So I would love to see what he said. Yeah. I would love to see what he said in that situation. My number 1, So it was also like, maybe one time we could do guys who like it really broke my heart when they left the Raiders. But Roger Coleman, I just feel like, and I didn't even realize till last week when you told me that he was former linebacker before he went to defensive tackle. But the guy, a lot like my number one corner, who was Terry McDaniel, just unheralded. Like the guy I couldn't believe how many sacks this guy had from that defensive tackle position. A really talented player for the Raiders and for the Falcons as he left in free agency.
I went Daryl Russell number one. The Raiders traded up to number two. I think they were picking 10th. I remember Daryl Hobbs was in that trade, but they traded from 10 to 2, thinking they were going to get Orlando Pace. They didn't get Pace. The Rams took Pace, but then they took Daryl Russell too. But tremendously productive, 28.5 sacks in 5 years. Unfortunately, passed away in a car accident in 2005. There was a couple suspensions for some performance enhancing or drug suspensions. But when he was on the field, his second year, he was a first-team All-Pro. And this guy was a 2-time Pro Bowler right out the gate, 2 of his first 3 years. So he was a Trojan, fight on, but had a great career ahead of him. Just a lot of things happened off the field, and then the unfortunate passing in the car accident. But Daryl Russell was an unbelievable talent. He just couldn't figure out the off the field stuff.
Yeah. Here's something else. So we had defensive tackles. We did defensive tackles. We did offensive linemen. Let's go to tight ends now. And tight ends, there are a lot of guys on this list who are like my honorable mention, who I thought were going to be stars. I thought these guys were going to be stars for the Raiders. So let me run through my honorable mention real quick. And if you have any, you can go to after. Courtney Anderson, I thought was going to be a star. I thought he was going to be a really good player. Ricky Dudley, I thought he was going to be a star. He was okay. I thought he was going to be a star. Just the physical build of him. He's built a lot like Darren Waller. In a lot of ways. Teo Johnson and Clyde Walford. Those are my honorable mentions only because those are the guys who I thought were going to be special players for the Rays, but it didn't end up happening. Roland Williams is my number 5. So if you have honorable mention in your number 5 as far as that goes.
Yeah, I have a couple. I have Andrew Glover as an honorable mention.
Glover, yes.
91 to 96 for the Raiders. Mike Rivera. It was an honorable mention as well. And I'm surprised you didn't bring up David Osbury, because that's the one that Raider fans still talk about to this day. Another Trojan that they tried to turn into a tight end. But number 5, I went Jared Cook. Every one of the tight ends that I have on this list, all 5 of them made the Pro Bowl while a Raider. So the Raiders have a nice tradition here of tight ends. But I went Jared Cook. Just the 2 brief years there with Derek Carr, but 122 catches, almost 1,600 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Was one of the more reliable middle of the field guys when you had Cooper and Crabtree outside. But just Jared Cook, again, like I said, 2 years. I wish it was longer, but obviously the Raiders upgraded when they brought in Darren Waller.
It's interesting how many teams Jared Cook has played for. I mean, he's pretty productive.
He's the Stephon Marbury tight end.
Stephon Marbury is tight end. Stephon Marbury. Hopefully he doesn't eat Vaseline. Number 4, like Stephon did in China. Number 4, Ethan Horton. I was like Ethan Horton. And some of these guys, I feel like too, if they played today, like my number 2 would have been a star in the NFL today. If he played in the NFL today, with all the rules and everything like that. But Ethan Horton is my number 4.
Yeah, surprisingly, Ethan Horton is mine as well. He was a running back in college. He was an all-ACC running back in North Carolina, drafted by the Chiefs, got released after a year. Everyone thought he was a bust. A year or 2 later, Al Davis signs him, converts him to tight end. And then he played 7 years with the Raiders as a tight end, making a Pro Bowl. I want to say the Pro Bowl was in 1993, but just could really create after the catch. He didn't play for a team that threw the ball a ton. He doesn't have great numbers, but I just loved watching Ethan Horton play tight end, knowing that his background was as a running back, and then he made himself into a useful blocker. And then, like I said, he could make plays after the catch. Scored 13 touchdowns with the Raiders.
Another guy who just came to my mind was Doug Jolly. He's like the Mark Grace of tight ends with no gloves, right? No gloves, right? As far as that goes. Jared Cook was mine. I thought Jared Cook was really fit, was a really talented pass catching tight end, and I think he can just keep playing as long as Jimmy Graham played. He can just keep playing until he's 45 if he wants to. I mean, the guy still can get behind defenses and everything like that as far as that goes. Who's your next guy?
I went Zach Miller, number 3. 4 years with the Raiders, again, made a Pro Bowl, was the second-round pick out of Arizona State, and ended up with, almost 3,000 yards, 12 touchdowns with the Raiders before moving on to the Seahawks, but really a productive 4-year career. When you said Doug Jolly, the name Brandon Myers popped in my head. There's another tight end that could be on the honorable mention list, but I went Zach Miller, the golden retriever. Oh, that was Todd Heap. They both played at the same school. Yeah.
So Zach Miller, do you remember? Was that the game against the Eagles with Jamarcus Russell, the 80-yard touchdown? He took one pass that was like a 10-yard pass, or backed up into it. He ended up, I think he had a great block down the field and ended up scoring on.
I don't remember who it was against, but I do remember him scoring a long touchdown. Took short. Yeah.
He's a guy, and then also I remember he had a couple touchdowns in the 59-10 game they had at Denver. So I remember that as well. But yeah, I love Zach Miller. I thought he was a really good player. I think if you could. There's certain guys who you love to see play today. He'd be on that team because he really would be. It'd be good, cool to see him play right now. Because he'd be like Zach Ertz, and Todd Heap. You mentioned the guy, or Mark Andrews, people like that. He'd really be that good as far as that goes. And who is your number 1?
I have number 2 still. Did you give your number 2?
Number 2. Sorry, number 2 is Miller. I got long-winded. Yeah, sorry.
I went Darren Waller, number 2. Don't need to spend a ton of time on, but been with the Raiders 4 years, made a Pro Bowl, 3,000 yards, 14 touchdowns. I wish that 14 touchdown number was a lot higher. We've talked about that for a long time on this podcast. So hopefully that number, it'd be great if he could double that this year. I don't know if he can score 14 touchdowns, but I'd like to see him get to double-digit touchdowns in a season and really cement his name in the all-time tight end list.
Yeah. My number 1 is Darren Waller. I am worried that we're coming to the end with Darren Waller with the Raiders. Hopefully it does not take place. Hopefully they can come to a agreement with the Raiders and Ziegler and everybody like that. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I think in this offense, and I think the first game of the year too, you're going to see it. I think he's going to really shine in this offense. I mean, really seriously. I mean, all the stuff that he does with the tight ends from day one, they've been doing stuff with tight ends. So I'm really excited to see what this offense looks like with the slot receiver who, for years, they've been killing it with slot receivers in New England, and now with Darren Waller at tight end.
Yeah, my number 1, I went Todd Christensen. I might be a little bit older than you, but 9 years with the Raiders, 5-time Pro Bowler, almost 6,000 yards, 41 touchdowns. Was a game show host on Married with Children in one episode, one of my favorite TV shows of all time. But Todd Christensen was fun to watch. He was. There was an episode where he was a game show host and Travis James. But love Todd Christensen, growing up there in the mid to late 80s when I really started getting into football around 1984, 85 when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and then watching him through the end of the early 90s. But Todd Christensen was before his time. He would dominate today. Like, this guy could catch, could get open, could run routes. He was elusive for a guy his size, and he could run. So really good tight end in the mid 80s.
I just got to the back half of that part of it. I do remember him. I got to the back half of it. That's cool. We got through it. We got the offensive linemen. We got the defensive tackles. We got the tight ends. As far as that goes.